All right. So welcome to the next lecture of the Angular course. So as for today's lecture, we're going to talk about the routing. So actually, the routing is the core mechanism of any single page application. So with the help of the routing mechanism, we're able to create multiple pages within our application in such a way that during the navigation among those pages, the browser window won't be refreshed. So the page, at least some of the components will remain on the page, and the only changes that are going to be performed during the navigation is some content container, I would say. So let's get a deeper dive into the routing mechanism and how can we use it during the Angular development. So let's start with the application layout. So we referred to the same picture during our previous lectures. So just to remind that on the regular single page application, only the parts of the elements will be updated during the navigation. So, and this container is called the router outlet. So during the navigation, only router outlet will be changed with its content without refreshing the entire page. So, and also the router outlet could be also included not only once per application. So we can have the nested routes on any other pages. Let's assume that we're just navigated to the home page and we want to create some of the nested content that depends on the current browser URL. Let's imagine that the nested views are the tabs on the home page. So we can create this dynamic container not only globally, but in scope on some other page. So with the help of the Angular routing, we can easily create the nested views as well. Okay. Well, this is the scheme that describes how can we create the structure of our app in terms of the routing. So as you can see, so this tree could be endless in terms of the nested views. So the root 2 has some child roots like on the previous example. So here there are some nested roots, and we also can create the nested roots for the child 1 or the child 2. So with the routing, we can create the tree of the navigation as deep as we want. All right, so how can we start using the routing in the Angular application? So first, we need the library module that is called the router module. And as you remember, during the lecture about the modules, I highlighted that there are some static methods for module configuration. So instead of just importing the router module, we can create import the updated router module depending on the provided routes. So most of the library modules are configurable and can be used as the following. So in order to provide the routes of our application, we're calling the static methods for root and passing the list of our routes to this module. So in my example, we have 2 pages on our app. So this is the credit center and some details page. So the column ID actually is the parameter, and we can navigate to this page by typing the URL hero/everything. Here could be the ID of the particular resource that we want to access to, right? So we can also have a separate module for configuring routes. And if we generate the feature module with the following command, so let's try to do so. So I have some bunch of examples here. So let's try to create a feature module. We're going to use ng module. Let's some other feature, and if you pass the key routing, it will create 2 files. One of them is the module itself, and another one is the routing module. So if you are going to create the feature module, perhaps you need the following command to create the routing module as well. And here the routing module accepts the list of routes that are going to be used within this feature module. So this is the most preferable way of passing the list of routes to the router module. Just because you don't need to manually import the router module and perform the invocation of static methods in order to configure it. So the only thing you need to perform is just to specify the list of routes right here and start using the feature module. All right. So and here on the example, we're using the router module for defining the routes of the app module. What else we need to enable the routing within the app? So first of all, we need the router outlet, at least one. That will be changed. The content of the router outlet will be changed during the navigation. So we need this element. And here on the example, we see that if we navigate to either the page 1 or page 2, the content of the main tag will be changed as well. So here is pretty simple. So how do we perform the navigation? There is the internal property, I would say the directive, that is called the router link. That will perform the navigation over our page using the routing mechanism. So why don't we just use the href attribute instead of the router link? That's because if we specify the href, the navigation will be fully reloaded as we navigate to the URL. So if we want to perform the navigation, that will behave as the single page application without reloading everything. We have to specify the router link directive and passing the URL. In our case, this is home or me, and the router link active property we'll add the class active to the particular element in case if the current root is active. So if you navigate to the home page, the first A element will have the CSS class active. So we can implement some active styles for this element to indicate that we are currently on the home page. So this is one of the examples. Another one, if we define the router link as, if we use the router link directive as the property binding, we're going to, instead of the string, pass the array. So the array will help us with passing the multiple URL segments. Let's say we have some dynamic property, and perhaps the better idea will be to use the second example, just because the username is some variable that is going to be substituted instead of the username. And again, the router link active, which will behave the same as in the first example. I guess there's no difficulties right here, so let's move further. Also, the router module will enable us to perform the navigation from the components as well. Not only components, but services and any other building blocks that are available on the Angular. So to perform the navigation, let's say from the component, but by that I mean that the navigation could also be performed from the service or the pipe or directive, but it's kind of bad practice. I would say I will perform at least from the service in case the service will handle such redirects. Let's say if we have some unhandled error from the server, or if we need to show some page to indicate the error from the backend, so the navigation could be performed from the service as well. In our case, let's just say we can programmatically perform the navigation. So to do so, we need to inject the router, which is the service, and invoke the navigate method, or navigate by URL. The difference is in the type of the parameter that is passed to the method. So if we need just to navigate by a known URL, we'll use the second variant just because it's simpler to use. However, if we have some dynamic attributes that will be simpler to pass to the array instead of the template string and so on, so the navigate is our option. Okay, moving on. So I talked a little bit about the dynamic root parameters. The most common case is the resource ID. Let's say we have the following path defined on the router module with column username, and to access to the value of this param, we're going to refer to another dependency which is called the activated root. So from the activated root, we can grab the specified username to perform the further logic. Let's say to grab the data from backend or any other logic which is related to the current username. So there are two options. How can we access the past root param? One of them is to access the snapshot object, which is static, and the snapshot will not be changed after the navigation. But if we are on the same page and we changed the root param, let's say we changed the username on our address bar, and we want to reflect to these changes. There is another option to achieve this, is to refer to the params from the current root. And in this case, the params object is the observable. So if you remember from the previous lecture, the observable is the asynchronous object, like the promise in JavaScript, but with the huge amount of extra features. However, we're going to consider the observable in details during our next lecture. So for now, let's just say the params object is the the object that will push all the changes to our subscriber, and it will allow us to reflect to the changes without reloading the entire page. There is another reason if we want to reflect to the changes dynamically. It's just because if we stay on the same page and change just the username, the page won't be reloaded. That just because the root is already activated, and the only changes here is the username. So if you need to reflect to the latest changes of the parameter, not only root parameter, but also remember we have the query parameters as well. So the second variant is your option. Just for you to remember that there are two ways of accessing the parameters of the current route. One of them is by accessing the snapshot, and we remember that this is the static object, and we can just access the param at the moment of navigation, or to subscribe to the latest changes to reflect to these changes on the fly. All right. So before we move on to the next topic, let's see some bunch of examples. How can we get started with the routine? So let's refer to our entry point and see what's happening here. So we're having the bunch of the components and library imports. So browser module is imported by default. Uprooting module, this is our module for configuring routes, and some other bunch of library modules. So we need to review the uprooting module to see what's happening here. So we're having the bunch of paths that are configured. Let's refer to the first section. So we simply the object is pretty simple. So the entry of the array simply just path and the component that will be used and substituted to the router outlet. And the first, let's say, the first entry of the routes array will tell us if we don't have anything specified on the URL. So if we just open the localhost column 4200, it will navigate it to the path home. So let's see how it works. I'm going to remove the home from the address bar and try to navigate. So it redirects me to the path/home. So nothing extraordinary here. As well as the simple usage of the pages instead of this one. So here we're waiting that instead of the column ID, the ID of the user will be specified during the navigation. Okay, let's see what we're having on the app component. We're having the bunch of the links with the URL specified. In the first example, we see that the first link will refer to the home page. As for the second, actually the button, which will perform the navigation by triggering the router method, and the result will be the same. However, there is another difference between the link, actually the link with the attribute specified, and a simple button. So if you look closely at the left bottom corner of the browser, you will notice that the browser highlights the URL of the link, and button doesn't have actually the URL. It's just triggers the code. So if you if clicking the link will not introduce any complex side effects, let's just keep it simple and use the A element with the router link directive. All right. So what else do we have here? Except of these links, we have the router link active. Let's see what CSS classes do we have on the element A. So as we can see, the CSS class active is applied to the first link, and if we click on another one, so the link will be highlighted as well. But we don't see any styles on the simple button, and that's just because the second element is defined as button without any router links, and that's why the simple link is not highlighted in our case. So if you want to enable the router link active, so be sure that you're specifying the link as the element A and the router link as the property. Okay, so let's see what else do we have. We have the navigation to the user page. So as I mentioned, the router link directive is if we specify as the property binding, it accepts the array, not a string. So if we want just to pass the string right here, so the router link should be specified like the following. If we want just to pass the URL as the string, so the link will look like the following without any arrays. Let's see, do we have? Yeah, the result is the same, except the way of passing the URL. So let's leave it for now. So according to our routing module, The user page has the dynamic ID, and let's have a look how it's handled on the page. So as I mentioned, there are two ways of accessing the root parameters. So first one is subscribe, and the second one is why accessing the snapshot. Oh, well, let's try to do the following. So we're canceling log this user ID, and let's try to use the same behavior via the snapshot. Okay. So as you can see, we're performing the navigation by clicking links, and we have only one log, which is situated on the ng on init. So, and in our case, that's why we used the subscribe, because the cancel log appears once. Because Angular sees that the navigation occurs to the same page, and that's why there is no need to re-init the existing component. So this behavior is by default, and you should be aware of it if you want to reflect to the param changes. Actually, there are two options. First, you subscribe to the root params and use the logic inside of the subscription. And the second option, so possibly you can, in the imports, specify the object, and there is a parameter called same, sorry, not here, on same URL navigation, pass the string reload. Let's see the result. Well, actually, nothing happens. Okay. So I guess this is not an option. Okay. So I thought it would work, but okay. So in our case, the only way to do is to subscribe to the params and perform some logic. And also, the URL can consist not only of the root params, but also the query params as well. I guess this is the common case. So we have the active subscription to params, and we can also perform the same for query params. Let's just log it to see whether everything works. So yeah, as we can see, the query, we can also handle the query params by accessing it via the root, the activated root, as well as the root params. Okay, so let's see, what do we have? What else do we have? Yeah, we're having the root navigation. So we have two different versions of navigation to the user page via the link in the template, and the method by passing the command. So there are two ways. Okay. Well, before we move on next. Do you have any questions at this moment? All right, if no, so let's proceed. The lazy loading. So actually, this is the essential feature of the routing mechanism. During our previous lecture, I mentioned that in ideal world, the feature model is the lazy loading model. It means that instead of loading the entire application at once, we're going to divide our application by several parts. And those parts are the feature modules. So if you remember, the feature module could be any part of our business logic. So to start using the feature module, we're going to create a new one via the following command. So the following module will be created with the my routing module with its content. So I presented to you previously. So in order to use the lazy loaded module, we're going to define the path inside of the app module. So the syntax will look as the following. And in this lazy loaded module, we can also define the nested routes as well. So to create a lazy loaded module, we perform the command that are specified in the slides, and that's how we are using the lazy loaded module. So the following syntax is applied, and important note here is that lazy loaded module is not directly imported into the app module. So if you have a look at the references, we see that we have only two occurrences. This is the module itself where we export it, and the routing module that is used for defining the routes. So we don't have any direct imports into another modules. So we're not going to do as the following, since starting from now, if we perform the direct import, the current module will not be lazy loaded anymore. So the lazy loaded, well, the current module won't be lazy loaded, and it will be loaded as well as the whole application. So if you want the lazy loaded module to be loaded only during the navigation to that particular module, we're not going to use the direct imports, and we need just to specify the lazy loaded module within the routing module of the app. All right. So let's have a look at the lazy loaded module content. So it consists of a single component and the routing module as well. So we have a single route, the lazy loaded page component, and let's see and try to navigate to it. So we performed the navigation to the lazy loaded module, and to prove that the module is lazy loaded, let's refer to the network tab and see what's happening here. So once we clicked the lazy loaded link, actually the script which refers to the lazy loaded module has been loaded only when we clicked the link. So this module is applied and loaded on the fly and not within the whole application bundle. So we loaded this particular module separately. So we have the single root here. It's just because if we want to define some kind of landing page for the feature module, we pass the empty string to the pass property. And also we can create some other roots. Let's say just not to create another component. Let's load it. Another. And another works as well. If we specify some other route, we get the redirect to the not found component. So, and how can we define the following behavior? At the end of the routes array, we define the following. While the asterisk syntax, we say that if there are no matches with the specified routes, we're going to use the following component. In most cases, this is the component that's refer that there are no matches with the specified within the specified routes in our app. So the not found component will be opened instead of raising the error that the Angular doesn't recognize the specified URL. Let's try just to remove the following from our module. And we see that we cannot match any routes with the specified URL. So perhaps it's a good practice to have the following component. Well, just because to notify the user that URL is not correct. Okay. So this is for the lazy loaded modules. So the lazy loading mechanism is usually used for the feature modules. And also important note, if you notice that in the app routing module, in the import sections, we use the static method froot. And if we refer to some other routing module, the static method is called forChild. For you just to remember that for the router module, we call the static method froot only once and only within the app routing module. In any other cases, we need to use the forChild method, static method, for defining the list of routes within the feature module. All right, I'd like to stop for a couple of seconds here and ask you whether everything clear for you or you have some questions at this moment. I'm sorry, did you just try to say anything?
I think it's clear. Okay.
Okay. All right, let's move further in this case. Another important mechanism for routing is called guards. Well, actually, guards are the services that are invoked during the router navigation. So what the guards are? Actually, this is the service that is triggered when we navigate to some specific page, and this guard checks whether the navigation will occur or not. The most common case if we want users to restrict the access to some of the pages. So in our case, we don't want any regular user to access the admin page. So we can restrict the anonymous or the logged in user without proper permission from accessing the admin page. So on the routes array, we specify the following property. This property accepts the array with the guards. So we can have the multiple guards that will be invoked during the navigation. And also I missed the how can we define the nested routes. So we're going to consider on the practically in a couple of seconds. Here is can we define the nested routes? If you remember from the previous slides, let's just refer. Yeah, so the Angular enables us to have the nested routes within some pages, like in this example. So to define nested routes, we need the children property, which accepts the array of routes as well. And we can have the endless routes tree as we want. For now, we need to get deeper into details of how the guard looks like. So actually, this is the service that implements the canActivate interface and have the method canActivate that returns some of the values. So it could be the Boolean itself, or it could be the any other asynchronous object, whether the promise or observable. So within the canActivate method, we can return any other value, and because it enables us with returning any asynchronous object within the guard, we can also perform the requests to the backend to check some condition. So let's see. In case the user is logged in, so we have the OS guard. If it's logged in, we'll return the boolean true. And in case if not, and if we want to perform the redirection to the login page, we're free to inject any other dependency inside the guard and perform the navigation like specified here. And return the false because we want to prohibit the further navigation. This is the basic guard implementation. Another feature is the interface can load. So what's actually the can load? So this is actually the same as the canActivate, but canActivate prohibits just the navigation, and the can load will prevent from loading of the lazy loaded module. So if we just specify the can activate property, the feature module will be loaded, but the navigation won't occur. So if we want to prevent not only from navigation, but from loading itself, just because if the navigation is prohibited, so there is no need to load this particular module. So can load could be also specified. And the structure of the can load method is actually the same. And in most cases, if we implement the guard for some feature modules, here we can have the single methods that is invoked from both can activate and can load methods. So we will see shortly how the guards are implemented. So to create the guard, there is the schematics on within the ngCLI. So we can use the following ng guard, and the guard is going to be created. So there is a selection of which of the interfaces we want to implement. Let's say can activate and can load. So I'm pressing the space bar to select the interface and the enter to proceed. And we created the new guard with the implemented interfaces. Let's see what's going on in existing guards. So we have some page with restricted access. Let's see what's going on inside the old guard. It's just returning the promise with the Boolean. And it returns false. Okay, let's try to access this page. And as we can see, the old guard has been invoked several times as I clicked the admin link, but the navigation does not is not performed. So if we change the value false from false to true on the old guard, the navigation will happen. We're seeing that the admin page has been opened. And in case we want to implement the redirection in case of a failure, I mean, if the guard returns false, so there are actually two options. First, we can inject the router service and do the following: navigate by URL and specifying any other route as we want. So let's say we are on the user page and clicking the admin. So we are redirected to the home page. And there is another option. I would say the simpler one. Well, actually, the guard can return two value types. It could be Boolean or the URL tree. So instead of triggering the router navigate, we can return the URL tree. we're going to create URL tree. So if you notice right here, there is no Boolean anymore. But the redirection still occurs. I would say it's more advanced way of performing the redirects. This is just because this simpler solution, and it can avoid using if else's inside the guards to perform the redirection. All right, let's see another example with guards. So we have a bunch of guards. First one is can activate and can load. So let's return the changes to false. Well, let's check again. So another module, as we can see, is the lazy loaded module. And let's see, all the guards will return the false. So actually it will prohibit us from the further navigation. However, let's see, let's check the network tab and see what's happening. I click the another module link, and the navigation isn't happened, but still we loaded the lazy loaded module. And that's not quite a good solution because we don't need to load anything in case the navigation is prohibited. So let's add the can load property. And in this case, the module isn't loaded just because the can load guard returns false. Well, let's have the small experiment and change the else guard to true and see what's happening. So we changed the value. Okay, so the can load still returns false. So perhaps for the future modules, the can load, we can just use the can load, which will prohibit from further navigation because the module isn't loaded. And okay, let's check loading guard. Yeah, I see. And what do we have on in the OS guard? Check loading guard. So first it's runs the can load guards and then can activate guards. That's because the loading guard returns false. The Angular won't proceed to the can activate guards. So that's why the check loading guard is printed without referring to the else guard. So well, let's change this one to true and see what will happen next. And when the loading guard becomes true, the else guard is also invoked. So, and seems like pages within the another module works perfectly fine. We defined some routes right here, and seems like everything works as expected. But if you notice right here, the CSS class active applied to both of the links. That's just because the Angular routine found the reference to to the URL/another, and that's why I decided that both of the links are active. So in order to fix it, we're going to add an extra property. But actually, I have the following solution. So we're going to pass another property to indicate that we should perform the exact match of root. And in this case, the problem will be fixed. We see that the appropriate link is highlighted. As before, we move on to our to-do list management application and implement some routing features from scratch. Let's also have a look at what's going on the tabs component. Okay, so we have some child routes specified here, and let's refer to the tab component. And as we can see, the tabs component has router outlet element as well. So if we refer to the UI, the nested routes will look as the following. So I guess nothing difficult. But just to show you that we can also define the child route as well. And remember that the guard also have the can activate child property to prevent from loading the nested routes in case the condition won't met under some circumstances. All right, I suppose that's everything from the example perspective. Well, I can just show you another routing feature. I guess it could be useful to you. The feature is called the resolver. So what the resolver is, first, I want to show some other features for the routing. I'll pass the following property to show you something special. If you pass the enable tracing, you will see all the navigation events that will occur during the navigation, and to review the details on which router events are triggered at the current moment. So we see that the navigation starts from the events navigation start. What else do we have? We have routes recognized, guard check, blah, blah, blah. Activation start. And the navigation ends with the navigation end property. And the event scroll actually restores the scroll position. I don't know how to actually we can do this. Let's say we have the following scroll. If we leave this page and click the back button on the browser, it will restore the scroll position. So as you can see, there are a bunch of the events, and it could be useful. For instance, if you want to show the loading spinner during the router navigation. So how can we achieve this? First, the router has the events. So we can subscribe to it. Well, let's schematically just say we want to show the loading spinner on navigation start, I'll just describe what they mean. Show spinner. So perhaps you'll will have the better solution for this, but I just wanted to demonstrate the functionality. So, and the navigation end, on the navigation end will hide the loading spinner. Well, just in case, I will disable the root tracing, just not to mess the console. For now, navigation occurs very fast, but remotely, especially if you load huge feature modules that are lazy loaded, so it can take some time. And to make the interface more eye candy, so you can use the subscription to the router events to show or to hide the spinner. So why do we need the subscription to the events and showing and hiding the spinner? Let's assume the following case. What if we want to activate the root only if all the data from backend is loaded, instead of, I don't know, to specify the logic of loading the data inside of the component. So if we refer to the to-do list management app, we have the to-do list page, and the get to-dos method will look like the following. So we have to subscribe to events to handle asynchronous operations, and if the to-dos are still loading, we need to reflect somehow the loading state. Instead of doing this, we can do the following. We can create the resolver. There is no resolver in schematics of the Angular 7 because this, well, this example is quite outdated. Well, let's just create it manually. Resolvers data resolver.ts, and this is the service. Data resolver, which implements the interface resolve. So this is generic. That's here we can specify any type of the data. We're going to implement the method resolve, which accepts several params: the activated root snapshot and the router state snapshot. So why do we need these params? Is just because we can access the current root params, let's say the resource ID. So we can use the activate root snapshot to access all the root params. And let's just say the resource will load about 5 seconds. This is monotype operator functions. Or just timer. Okay. The timer will return the observable. Well, Let's say some asynchronous object will return the string that will be passed to the root, some root. Let's say we want to implement the resolver on the user page component. So there is a property which is called resolve. Let's specify the key for the data that's going to be resolved, and specify the resolver. Data resolver. Well, let's specify also that we want the service to be available within the root injector, and see what will happen if we try to access the user page. We click the user link, we see the show spinner appears, and then the navigation performed to the user. That's just because our resolver works within the 5 seconds. And when resolver finished the fetching the data, only then the navigation will occur. And show and hide spinner functionality also works perfectly fine as we defined within the app component. Like here. So let's add some other data for it. So let's see it. Current user ID. We want to pass the root params ID. Let's resolve the following string and access to the root params. Okay, and within the user page, to access this data, so we're going to remove the following console log. Well, actually, let's remove everything. This root data. And let's try to log it. What we will have? Well, we see the empty page. That's because the navigation still occurs. The routing data is the observable. This is actually the asynchronous subject, but we can access it via snapshot. Until everything will work fine. Yeah, as we can see, by accessing the data of the activated root, we will see the following data that is returned from the resolver. And as we can see, the ID is correct. Yeah, and also the navigation occurs. Show spinner, hide spinner. But as we can see, we don't see any data. That's because, as I mentioned, that the component isn't initialized twice when we perform the navigation. So as we performed it with root params, so you can access the data asynchronous subject and subscribed to the data changes from the resolver. So I guess the resolver is also the useful feature in terms of the routing. Because there are multiple cases, especially if our component could not work without the data that is retrieved from the backend. So you can use the resolver for such purposes if you want. But there are no limitations, so you can just invoke the service method and perform the request for the resource to the backend from the component, and everything will work pretty fine. So this is the extra feature to think on it, especially if you are defining some application architecture. All right. So as for the routine, I guess I covered everything. So before we try to do something with our to-do list management application, I'm waiting for your questions. And then we will have a little work on the Ravel application, and we're going to create some extra pages. So if you have questions in this moment, so you can just unmute and ask me whether you want me to clarify anything. Maybe something is still unclear. So please go ahead. Well, I hope that everything is clear, since no questions, or if not, you. So there is some time to think on questions to me when we're going to implement some extra features to our to-do list application. So let's first stop the application with examples and see what do we have at the moment. So we don't have routing at all, and we need to set up the routing for our page. So first of all, we need the app routing module.ts. So if you generate the modules automatically, so you don't need to create these files manually. These are going to be created automatically, and just not to waste our time, I'm just going to copy and paste from the examples. Remove redundant routes. Redirect to, let's say, our path will be called TODO. So we don't have any not found pages, but I guess it will be great if we create this. So usually I place the such pages to the car module. So if you create the page, this is a good practice to use the prefix page to indicate that this component is not the widget, but the whole container. Not found. Not found page. Component page. Just create this component to demonstrate the functionality. Well, let's create another entry to define TODOs load children. So let's also refer to this syntax just to be faster. TODO module, and in this case we need to remove the direct import from the app module. Well, so the import becomes even more easy. So let's see what's going on. If we serve the application, just ngserve. Well, to-do list page is not the Angular component, and that's just because instead of the static reference to the page, we need to add the router outlet. It's still doesn't accessible because we need to import the app routing module. The router outlet should be available. We see that we don't have anything on the page, but the module is loaded and no errors are occurred. That's because we didn't specify the routing module for to-dos as well. So let's create the routing module for to-dos as well. So this is the to-do routing module. A single pass right here, component, to-do list page component. So now it should work fine from this perspective. So let's see. Okay, nothing happens. That's because we haven't imported the to-do routing module. Okay, the router module for route called twice. That's just I noticed when I was talking about the static methods. So for route shouldn't be called twice. So if we use the root configuration inside the feature modules, we need to use the for_child static method. And as we can see, everything works pretty fine. So our mock backend is started. Start server. Yeah, everything works as expected. And using the routing features, we can specify any other pages we we can specify any other rules of navigation and to perform some to bring some flexibility within our app. So I guess everything that we considered during review of the router features should be enough. Well, if we want, we can specify any other pages to see what else can we do in the to-do list management app. So we can create the categories for it, but it requires a lot of time. So just for you, I would like to stop right here. However, in case if you need to showcase you how can we implement some extra routine features within our to-do list management app, so you can let me know which features you want me to implement, and we will review the extra features on our next lecture. Well, as for today, I will take some time to wait for your questions, and if no, we can wrap up today's lecture and see the next day. So we are having the lecture tomorrow, but let's wait for a couple of minutes for your questions to ask. So if you have anything, please go ahead, unmute and ask me something. Also, there is actually one other property right here just for you, so you can pass some static data to it and access it via the activated route. So it could be useful when you implement the resolver or the guards. Well, let's see. Oh, that shouldn't take too much to test it. The port is already in use. How it can be accessing non-circular. Well, what's going on? Non-existent property cat, SB, LS. Well, oh my gosh, what's going on? Yeah, I see that I didn't stop this server. I just wanted to take some time to show you that you can pass the static property. So the resolver is used on the user page. Yes, so this is our static data that is passed to the routing configuration, and it still can be accessible within the component. So what the common use case? Let's say we have some guard. The guard checks the roles of the user. So the user can be a regular user, anonymous, admin, or moderator. So there are some levels of privileges of the user.
Excuse me, I have a question. How can we get any information about policies of users? How to? Is it possible to find any admin from user? Is it possible?
So your question is, how can we get the current
Yes,
user?
yes, 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 yes. Is it
Actually,
from token or something else?
well, so let's assume that we implemented the authorization functionality, and when we retrieved the user token, during the page load, perhaps we want to grab the latest user data from the backend, and this data will contain the info about the current user role. Does it make sense now? So you basically just make the API call to grab the user data, and that's where the user data is stored, including the roles, the username or email or any other related information.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And one question also. In React, is possible by through URL pass any information data. It's possible here. I see you are. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible. Yes.
So perhaps I didn't catch your question.
Is it possible by router pass the data?
Yes. So so here on the router configuration, we just passed the static data. So if you need to pass the data from one component to another,
By URL.
yeah, I got your idea. So so we can do it. There is the mechanism. So we can do it by passing the router state. I will not just. Well, let's find the some of the documentation references, just because not to waste our time. To how to pass the data to rooted components. So let's see what's going on. Yeah, but this, how can we pass via the data? Here it is. So if you want to navigate to some URL and pass some object, so you can obtain it via passing the second argument state and pass some object here. So this is one of the possible options. So let's assume this is the one of the possible options. But I would suggest to use some kind of service that will hold a state for you during the navigation. But if you still need to perform this, well, let's refer. Where do we have? Yeah, as I mentioned, we can use service to achieve this, and state not the navigation ID. No, it's called actually the navigation extras. But that's just the API reference. Well, let's just put it simply. Pass the data between roots. I know how to perform it, but I just want to share it with you. So I can pass it via the root configuration. I can also pass it dynamically via the state. So I will just share the following link with you if you are interested in passing the dynamic
Yes,
data.
yes, of course.
But I would recommend you to use just a service for such purposes. But you still need to do it, so I guess.
I just need the information. Is it possible or not?
Yeah, sure, that's possible.
And also one question: if we want to get any information about user, it is regular user or admin, and you noticed that it's possible to get this information from token, but it's hashed, and is it possible? Is it good practice to retrieve this information on page? And
So once you retrieve the user token, or this token could be stored in the local storage. There is no need to decrypt this key. So you need just to make the API call to retrieve the current user. Let's just say there are two options how can we do it. First, you can refer to the app component and make something like this user service get user, and perform some logic here. So during the init of the application, you are performing the request to the current user. Yeah, of course, if you have some user token stored. And there is even another option. How can we do it? So this is let's just refer to the documentation to save our time. So there is injection token, which is called the app initializer. What's going on here? So inside the app module, we can use some sort of factory. We talked a little bit about factories within our previous lecture. And what's going on? So we can perform any asynchronous requests before our application will continue to start up. Because when you retrieve some user, the data will be unavailable for some time. So, and instead of implementing additional checks whether the user exists or not, so if it will be easier to use this mechanism as app initializers, so there is an option how to do it. Well, that's because let's assume on the app component, we want to access the user let's assume that get current user will return the users that is stored inside a service, but this data will not be available when we start the Angular application. That's because the request is asynchronous. And if we want the user data to be accessed right after, right at the time when we start the application, so we can use the app initializer. So when the request will complete, only then the application will continue or will start the bootstrapping. So in this case, when the ng on init will be invoked of the app component, so the user data will be accessible at this moment. So just for you, I can leave this link to you as well. So how to use the app initializer. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions so far?
No, that's all for me.
All right. Thank you for your attention. So if you still have any questions, you can reach me via Discord, and see you next time.
Thank you very much. It was very good explanation.
See you.
Bye.